We can start recording in go. Okay, here we are.
Here we are.
It is podcast time. Would you like to do the introductions?
Sure. So this is behindthevault.net, our first kick at the can at a podcast. So Sam and I are going to have a little conversation today about financial planning. I'm going to tell a few stories, have a few laughs, and see how this goes. We've had a few people ask for it, so sometimes be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. And
should be
here
interesting.
We are today doing that. Yeah. Let's do it.
So how do you want to
start this off?
Let's fully introduce ourselves.
All right. My name is Angelo. I've been a financial planner for over 12 years, or financial consultant. Right now, I work with a small group of clients. I also coach other advisors. I help them build their practice for those who want to sort of take it to the next level. And as you all know, we have this cool little YouTube channel called Behind the Vault, and we've been pumping out videos, and it's getting some traction. So everything starts small, and we just keep building and building. And it's like your financial plan, right? It's like your investment savings. You start small, start building that pot, and then one day the fruits of your labor pay off. So
that was a nice kind of intro to what you want to talk about slowly building.
Right.
But just before we get into that, my name is Sam Ballard, and I'm actually his producer of everything. So I make him do these crazy things. And that's about my introduction.
That should be your job title. The producer of everything. That's what it should say on your business card. The producer of
everything. And I just make him do all the crazy things. So why don't we start with you telling me what you do? I'm going to start with the big one. You can answer it any way you please.
So, I actually started my career doing financial education seminars in Mississauga, Brampton, and Etobicoke at William Osler and Trillium hospitals. That's really how I got my start. And I'll tell you, I remember the first one that I did was it was an easel with the paper and a marker. And I just wrote three things on the board. I wrote RSP, TFSA, critical illness. And I had 30 people in front of me. We did 5 sessions or 6 sessions amongst the different hospitals. And then it evolved into a PowerPoint presentation. And, through trial and error and different topics, we've been doing financial education seminars for 12 plus years. And, it was fun. I look back at the first few that I do, and I remember them vividly, thinking to myself, "Oh my goodness, I'm just starting out in this industry." But really, people a lot of the times just need some help in the right direction, right? You'd be floored at the number of people that say to me, "Oh, finances, like I'm so terrible at this stuff," and it's so weird because it's one of the biggest things we have to do in our lives is manage our money and get to retirement and make sure nothing financially goes sideways. And it really is the one thing, not one thing, but it is one thing that people they just don't pay enough attention to. It's weird. Like, people will tell you about what they're watching on Netflix in great detail, right? Or what app they've downloaded on their phone, but ask them about retirement and it's like deer in the headlights.
Well, I feel like it's interesting. So I'm a millennial, as they would say, and it is very interesting because the approach that people assume a lot of millennials have is a very disposable income type of thing. And when I was actually I have a diploma in marketing, and when I was studying that, in terms of how people purchase things, where they're willing to spend their money on. It's really interesting, this study of, the Gen Z versus millennial versus the older generations. And they have that the millennials, are more likely to be loyal to a brand, but also more likely to go and spend $5 at Starbucks and not even think twice about how that affects their daily budget. And they're more likely to drop $3,000 a month on an apartment, not thinking about the long-term future.
Well, it's interesting. And by the way, I don't know on your Zoom, but on my Zoom, you're like shoved into the side and, nobody puts baby in the corner. You may want to turn your camera a little bit. So yeah, it's better. There we go. So, it's so funny that you say that. And over the last 12 years, I'll tell you, when I got into the business, people used to say to me, 60% of Canadians spend more than they make. And I thought, yeah, okay, if you've got like tons of money, or if you've got no money, right, if you're really struggling, you're gonna spend more than you make because you sort of have to. And boy, was I wrong. What's interesting is that 60% of Canadians spend more than they make across the board. Whether you make 30 grand a year, 300 grand a year, or 3 million a year, 60% of people in every group will, I mean, not exactly 60, but you know what I'm saying, right? So it's interesting. Like, if you look at sort of my grandparents' generation that went through the Great Depression, right? They're very much save, 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 save. And I have clients now whose parents, some of them have passed away, but they've got parents in their late 80s and 90s, and their mentality is save, save. I have one client and she's got more than enough. I mean, she's got enough money to live to 120, legit. And she's afraid to go get a haircut for $30 or $50 or $70 because she's like, oh, I'm gonna run out. You have more than enough. But she doesn't believe me, which is fine. I mean, I'd rather you have more than enough and not believe me than not have enough and spend too much, right? But that generation grew up through the Great Depression, and then later, and not much later, World War II.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where that mentality comes in. The millennials, who, funny enough, are not a risky group as a general comment. And listen, I have millennial clients that take tons of risk, and so it's not everybody, obviously, right? But as a general group, they don't take as much risk as, say, the Gen Xers or the Boomers do, because they saw their parents go through the crash of 08.
Yeah.
So when the crash of 08 happened and they saw parents and grandparents that couldn't retire anymore, or they had to keep working, that affected them, right? So
Angelo, I lost your video. Yeah, okay.
no, I'm back. I can't put it on airplane mode or I lose the video, and when calls come in, I just have to hit the decline. So
that's okay.
As people are watching the playback of the video, they're just gonna have to deal. I don't know, whatever. So maybe you can like impose a monkey or something in the picture.
I was just gonna
right
edit
back.
it.
Or a big BRB, right?
I was just gonna edit it out, but yeah, I can put a monkey on your face.
Just put a monkey or something. It'll be fun. BRB, right? Or a monkey with a sign that says BRB. So no, but so it's really interesting because they're for the most part pretty risk adverse. And boomers, they take tons of risk. And what's interesting about the boomer generation is the boomer generation led the charge. They are that generation that has constantly throughout their lifetime always set the standard, right? So if you take a look at just automobiles, for example, when the boomers were in their 20s, what did car manufacturers make? They made sports cars. And when the boomers got into their 30s and 40s, what were they making? Minivans. And now when the boomers get into their 50s and 60s and 70s, now you see like Porsche and Mercedes, and they're making SUVs, right? Because they're moving up the luxury ladder, right? So, and if you think of music or you think of fashion, it's that boomer group that's always led the charge, and us Gen X is just sort of, followed along, right? But, demographics and circumstance definitely have a lot to do with people's mentality around money and around retirement.
Do you know what's interesting though, is I find that I was raised obviously very similar way as my sister, and we have complete opposite approaches to that, which is very interesting. And I don't know where kind of that disconnect happened, but we do have very separate views in terms of finances and financial funding, and just the idea of disposable income, which I think is
Are you the
interesting.
older sister or younger
No,
sister?
I'm the younger sister.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were mom
I
and
don't know.
dad
It's
this? Were mom and dad the same? Were they aligned the same, or were they very different
very
in how
much,
they approach?
no, very much so. My parents built whatever they had from essentially nothing. And my dad was a physician, and he went through med school. Through their first 10 years of marriage, he was finishing his residency and med school and everything like that.
Oh,
So
geez.
they were very much so a save, save, save. They were very smart with their finances, and it's just interesting that um, two millennials and two children who are raised the exact same way have completely different approaches to the idea of money. It's actually, we should probably
Well,
do a case study on my sister and I.
one day. Well, what's interesting is people, but that just shows you that everybody's different, right?
Yeah.
One of the taglines I've used before is a financial plan is like a snowflake. You know,
Hmm.
everyone's different, and everyone's going to be different. Everybody wants different things. Everybody approaches life differently. Listen, I had a client sit down and say to me, when I asked them about, the end and legacy and stuff, I said, what do you want to do? Like, do you want to leave your money to people or charity, children? Are you going to spend it all? Or, sort of what's the plan?
I'm going to
And
do a
he's
monkey, or I'll throw out a little animal on
whatever.
different times, depending on when that happens.
Sure. And what he said to me was, I plan on spending it all. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Vegas. I'm going to rent a Ferrari and I'm going to light it on fire and drive off a bridge. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, man, go big or go home. And I'm like, come on, you're messing with me. He's like, obviously I'm messing with you, but I'm, going to do something like, I'm going to do something like, go out in style, right? Blaze of
Now,
glory. And I
does
was like,
does he
okay,
have does he have
no
children?
kids.
No
No.
kids. No one to leave it
Yeah.
to.
No one leave it to you. He doesn't care.
Wow.
Right. So,
Wow.
but what I'm finding though is people get older. Now, this guy was in his like early 40s, right? But when you start to talk to people who are single in their 60s and 70s, who have sort of conceded the fact that, okay, you know what, I don't have a spouse or I don't have kids to leave it to or whatever. When those people get to that age group and the stress of the day-to-day working is gone, and you would be so surprised at how much stress people really, have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they start to do the things they want to do and they're passionate about. And that's where charity comes in, or volunteering, or just, and it doesn't have to be volunteer or charity. It could just be something people love, right? And they
Yeah.
fall in love with and they get a passion for. And they're like, oh, you know what? Well, I love music or I love theater. So you know what? I'm going to, the city of blah, blah, blah is building a theater. I'm going to donate $100,000 because it's going to go to, my next of kin, who could be like my niece's, daughter or something like that. And they're like, I'd rather, donate it to a cause that I'm passionate about, that I can make a difference with.
Well,
Right.
and you see a lot of people. My mom is actually the president of a restoration trust of an old church in St. Thomas,
There you go.
Ontario, and there's a lot of people that actually leave money to the church.
Yeah,
Which is
absolutely.
a very interesting, because I don't know, I guess always my thought was, okay, so get married, have kids, and everything gets left to my kids. But it's interesting because a lot of these people either make a decision that they want to continue, the church is so important to them, and it's not even it hasn't been open for years, it's just a historical
Right.
site now, but they want to put money into the restoration of it. It's very interesting what
Hmm.
people. Nice boss mug there.
Thanks. And it's really interesting is that, more and more over the last half of my career, the last 6 years of my career, people are talking more and more about charitable giving, right? And there's so many tax advantages from an estate perspective, on the financial side. Like, this is where my financial planner brain sort of starts to kick
Mhm.
in, where people are like, I want to leave a bunch of money to the church, for example. So let's use your example with the restoration of the church in St. Thomas. And let's say, I wanted to leave, or you wanted to leave $100,000 for that church, when you die? Well, there's really three ways to do it, right? Way number one is you put it in your will that $100,000 of my estate goes to the church. So your executor will pay all the debt, if there is any, pay all the taxes on the estate, if there is any, and then take the first 100,000 and go, here you go, church, done. And then the rest of it would go to, let's say you had some kids or nieces, nephews, whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's one way to do it. Your state does it. The other way to do it is you use insurance. So what people will do is go, okay, well, hang on a second. I want to give $100,000 to the church. If I buy a $100,000 insurance policy over the next, say, 20 years, it may cost me 25 grand, let's say. Just easy numbers, okay? So I'm going to pay 25 grand. And then when I die, the insurance company is going to pay that 100,000 to the church. Well, I just turned 25 grand into 100. That's great leverage of money, right? So when people think of insurance at a later stage, they go, oh, I don't need insurance. I built my wealth and I don't need to protect my income, or, my mortgage is paid. Well, yeah, but you can leverage insurance and split the bill. So why not let the insurance company donate that 100,000? You'll pay 25,000 in premium. So really it's going to cost your estate 25, and it's going to cost the insurance company net 75. People do that with their tax bill all the time. I've got a $500,000 tax bill because maybe I have a cottage, or maybe I've got some RSPs, and I want my kids to inherit that money tax free. Well, do I want my estate to pay that 500 grand, or do I want to buy some insurance and let the insurance company makes way more money than I do, right? They probably make more money in a day than I will in a lifetime. Let them pay it, right? I'll pay the premium, right? And the premium will never equal the benefit. But even if it was 80%, even if I paid 400 grand over a 30-year period and they paid 500 grand, still an extra 100 grand of my hard-earned money that my kids get to keep, right? So that's sort of the second way. The third way, and what some people do, is they go, well, hang on a second. Way number one is just take 100 grand from my estate and make the donation. Way number two is I'll buy a $100,000 policy. But you know what? If I'm willing to part with 100,000 from my estate anyways, how much insurance can I get for 100 grand? So now all of a sudden that donation becomes 250, not 100. And you can multiply that donation and do more good, right? So these are a lot of the conversations I've had. And it's interesting because some people go, nah, just take it out of the estate. I'm just going to spend it. And if my kids get 100 grand less, so what? And that's okay.
Wow.
And some people buy the insurance, and some people, say, well, how much insurance can I get for what I want to donate? And they give more, right? Or what they do is they say, you know what, instead of the one church or one charity, I can take that same 100 grand, turn it into 250, and I can give, the 100 grand to the church, and then I can do three $50,000 donations to the animal shelter, the women's shelter, or the local park to build a hockey rink.
So something that was interesting is that my mom was telling me, obviously, like not disclosing names or any disclosing names, but she was telling me that actually an individual, someone who passed away, did that, left a certain amount of money, and then said, I want all of these charity, all of the money given to within all of this. And it's really interesting because then it has to go into the executor. They have to decide how much goes to what area. It was a really interesting dilemma that happened because it was.
Did the person not specify? So did the person just say, here's $1 million and here are the 10 charities I want to give money to? So they didn't specify so much to this, so much to that. See, when you leave it to the discretion of an executor, that can get tricky, right? Because really the executor's job is just to carry out your wishes. And I tell clients and people, the more detailed you can be, I mean, we did a video on wills, the more detailed you can be in your will, the better. Because, what if that executor left $950,000 to the Heart and Stroke Foundation because maybe they were passionate about that, and then the other 9 charities split $50K? I mean, it's well within the right based on how it's written, but I don't know if dude would have wanted that, right?
So there was a lot of issues that went into because I I honestly don't remember how it ended up, but I guess it was kind of, one of them wasn't split fairly, and they're like, well, shouldn't it all be kind of, 20 or, however
Sure.
much was that, and it wasn't done that way. So it was a really interesting, very
Yeah.
interesting thing that they went through trying to figure out how much money goes where, and it was not pretty, because then you get the lawyer involved, and
which is ridiculous, right? Because now it starts to cost more money to the estate, right?
Mhm.
Again, keeping things vague in your will and having things open to interpretation causes so many problems.
Yeah.
One example, for example, is estranged children. So let's say, I've got 4 kids, not 3, and let's say one of them is estranged from the family because maybe they're, in a profession, and I use that term loosely, that I don't approve of, right? Or maybe they're living a lifestyle that, it's full of drugs and danger. I mean, whatever. You can let your Netflix imagination run wild. Let's say I have one child that I'm estranged from, that I've cut them off and I don't want them to have anything. Here's the problem. Here's what I tell people is you need to put in your will that you do give that child like a nominal amount, like $100, right? To Joey, I leave, to Joey, my 4th estranged child, I leave $100. Because if you just omit that person from your will and don't say anything, Joey can then go to take the will, which is public record, go to the courts and say, Your Honor, there was a mistake. He's got 4 kids, not 3. And here it says all kids will split the estate evenly. And guess what? Joey now gets 25%.
Wow.
When that's not what you wanted, right? So the more specific you can be, the better.
Well, and that's tough, right? Because then you come into different wills, that if they say, kids 50-50, but what if the, dad promised one of the kids the house,
Doesn't matter.
but the will says 50-50, how does that go? And then it's up,
50-50.
it's up to the executor and the lawyer,
No.
that no, but they want to do 50-50. But the problem is that there's a situation that I had witnessed personally where, the house was promised to the son, yada, 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 all this really, really complex. And it ended up being that the executor just wanted it, was like, it needs to be 50-50. But the one son was like, no, I get the house, but it doesn't work that way. And then actually hired another lawyer to go against the estate, even though the estate's like, we're just going 50-50, what the will says. And it ended up being just this headache of something that they had to go through because, this kid didn't understand that in the end, it's what the will says, which is 50-50.
Exactly.
So that's how it's going to be
whatever
split.
The will says.
Right.
Now,
So,
if the estate is 50-50, and let's say the house is $1 million and the estate's 1.5, let's just for easy numbers, right? Well, if the son wanted to keep the house, he then just has to pay out the other person $250,000. So that person walks away with $750,000, which is their half of the estate, and he walks away with $1 million house with a $250,000 mortgage, which is still $750,000.
right.
So
can we pause for just 2 seconds, Angelo? I'm really sorry.
Sure.
Pause. Okay, so
in the immortal words of Johnny Carson, we are back.
We are back. I am just that popular that I needed to take
my name is Johnny Carson, and my guest today is Samantha Ballard from the San Diego Zoo. So, anyways, that's before your time. Don't worry.
The zoo.
Johnny Carson always had somebody from the San Diego Zoo on his show, and they would always bring like exotic pets, like monkeys and lizards and snakes and anyways, that's
are you calling me a monkey?
No, I'm not calling you a monkey, come on. But haven't you always wanted a monkey?
Yeah. All right,
some people will get that reference, some people won't. That's okay.
I'm young. I'm too young for that.
Or whatever. Okay.
I have to keep my youth alive. Once you hit over your 30s, you're stretching at anything.
Get out of here. Get out of here.
All right. So we turn this introduction into a will discussion.
Well, I
So,
mean, we just started talking and we went on a
you
tangent.
know,
We can talk about
we
something
went on
else.
I don't,
So
is there anything else we need to conclude out of the will discussion?
no, just make sure you have one and make sure you're very specific in it. And if you
So
don't know,
I do have a question. So at what age do you think that you should have your first will?
I think you need a will when you have assets or children or both.
What about dogs?
Um,
Should I?
well, what do you want? What do you want to have happen to Darcy if something happened to you? Where's Darcy gonna go?
You know what? I do. He would probably go to my mom, but I do have. There actually is the breeder that I got him from, and I know a lot of people are saying you should adopt, and I agree with that. But I was just not at the point where I could risk having an animal who was sick, and just couldn't afford to give it the care that I needed to if it was a very sick animal. So I went with the safer route and went through a breeder. And it actually says in the breeder contract that I get to choose who Darcy goes to. But if that the actual breeder has to go and look where the dog is going to be living to make sure that it's a safe environment for the animal, or the animal goes back to the breeder.
That's a lot of control.
So, I mean, it's good. She
Well,
cares about them, right? And I guess she
yeah,
had
I
an
think
experience. She had an
where
experience where it was an older individual who owned the dog, and the kids didn't want the dog, and the dog wouldn't have been living in a healthy environment.
well, again, right? But it's like children. So if you are going to name somebody as the guardian of your children in your will, it's probably a good idea to ask them first, right? Like I
Yeah.
asked a couple of my cousins who don't have children. I said, "Hey, look, if something happens to me and the kid's mom, would you take the kids?" And they're like, "Listen, we love your kids, but we don't have children for a reason." Right?
Wow.
So, well, listen, I got three, right? So imagine something happens to me and three kids show up at your doorstep. And you're like, what? I didn't sign up for
Oh my
this.
gosh.
Right. I mean, that's not fair to the kids and it's not fair to the people that you've named as guardian. Right. So,
Yeah.
like a dog, I mean, find somebody who loves dogs and have that conversation. Hey, God forbid something ever happened to me. Would you take Darcy? In a heartbeat, I'll take Darcy now. Darcy's so cute, is probably what you'll get.
He
But
really is. He's a
yeah.
little fluff ball. He'll make an appearance
Right.
on one of these podcasts. I'll make him come up, and we'll have a podcast with him. We'll ask him questions.
Yeah. Okay. It might be a little rough, but we'll get through it.
That was funny. It was a funny
Listen,
joke.
that was you get one or two every now and again. So
Yeah. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I don't know if we should maybe wrap
let's
up.
switch gears. You know what? I had a really great conversation with a friend of mine the other day around
Awesome.
inheritance. And I
Oh,
wanted to share that with you because, you know, what we're going through right now, the boomer generation, up until a few years ago, was the largest demographic in the world. And now the millennials are slowly starting to take over that, right? So if you look at demographics, and I'm a big fan of demographics, it's the boomers are a big group, the Gen Xers are a small group, and then the millennials are a big group, right? So it's like a big hourglass. As Gen X or as boomers, they worry about things like, is there going to be enough money in CPP? Is there going to be enough money in healthcare? Are there going to be enough beds? We need to build more long-term care facilities. The Gen Xers don't worry about this because by the time we get there, the boomers will be gone. And the millennials, which will be a huge group, will be funding healthcare, funding CPP. So we're ready to
hey.
rock, right? Like we're like, but that's the thing, right? It's whenever a Gen Xer says to me, "Oh, do I need to worry about CPP?" I'm like, no, God, no. Because by the time we get there, the boomers will be gone and the millennials will be in their prime earning years, pumping money into that thing. But what we're going through right now actually is is the single largest wealth transfer in the history of the world. So you've got a situation where all these boomers are passing away and they got to give their money to somebody, right? Somebody's going to get it. It's not just going to disappear, right?
Me.
The government's
I'll
just
take
not going
it.
to take it. Right. So, what's going on? So I had a conversation with a really good friend of mine who called me the other day and he said to me, listen, he goes, my parents have decided to give my sisters and I some of our inheritance money now while they're alive.
Hmm.
And they can see us enjoy it and they want to start chunking it out. And I was like, okay, great. And he's like, how should I invest it? I'm like, I don't know. What's the money for? He's like, well, I don't know. I'm like, well, see, here's the thing. And if you take anything from this podcast, if you were to ask an investment advisor or a financial advisor or anybody, how would I invest this money? If the first question out of their mouth isn't, well, what's it for? And they just start jumping to giving solutions like, oh, buy this stock and buy that fund and buy this and put your money here and blah, 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 blah. And they start going off. They're not listening to you. They're not diving into learning about you. They just want to show you how smart they think they are. Right.
Mm.
Because here's the thing. So let's say, for example, this friend of mine was getting 100 grand. I'm just making a number up. Okay. And
Yeah.
that's the example we used in the conversation. I said to him, if you're going to get 100 grand from your parents now, I said, you're 40 years old, you have your own apartment, you have your own job, what's the money for? And he said, well, I don't really know. I said, okay. I said, so let's talk about
So
the future.
is he in the same situation, no kids,
He's single, no kids.
Okay.
Yeah, single, no kids, rents an apartment, has a decent job, makes 65, 70 grand a year. Like COVID for the rest of us is feeling a little trapped, but normally he's a pretty social guy, likes to go out, whatever, right? So I said to him, I said, well, how much do you have saved for retirement? He says, well, nothing. And I'm like, okay, so you're young now and you can work and make your 65 grand a year. When you hit 65 or 70, where's your income going to come from? And he said, I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. I'm like, okay. And by the way, age 40 is actually not a bad time to start. So if anybody listening to this podcast is like, oh, I'm 40, 45, I haven't saved anything, I'm screwed. No, you're not. I've had clients walk in my door in their mid 50s and we've been able to solve their issues. Now they weren't going to have the retirement they thought they were going to have because they started so late, but it can still be done with some planning and some runway space. Now, that is not a license for you to go, well, I'm only 40, so I got 15 years of being irresponsible, and then I can, worry about it then, right?
That's where mine meant. Okay, I have 10 years until I can think about it. Then I have 15 years before I should start doing it. No, just kidding.
Well, you better marry rich then. No. So what I said to him was, if we go under the assumption that money doubles every 10 years, your 100 grand becomes 200 grand when you're 50, 400 grand when you're 60, and call it 800 grand when you're 70. Okay. So let's take it to age 60. So let's say we're at 400 grand. Okay. Let's say you want to retire at 60. And let's say you want to make the same income you're making now. You just don't want to have to go to work for it. So let's use 65 grand a year. I said, if you've got $400,000 saved and we use a 5% rate of return where you keep the capital and you live off the interest, right? Well, what's 5% of 400,000? That's 20 grand. Add CPP and OAS, it's another 20 grand. You're at 40. I go, you're not at 65 yet. You're at 40. So there's still a gap of 25,000. And we're talking today's dollars. Like, we'll factor inflation into the conversation naturally and organically, but just for simplicity, I said to him. So I said, if your parents gave you, let's say, 100 grand a year for the next 3 years, and that money doubled twice, 300 becomes 600 becomes 1.2, 5% of 1.2 is 60 grand. We're good now. Now your retirement's settled, right? You've got 60 grand, you're going to get like 60 grand a year just on the interest. And you'll have some good years and some bad years, but for the most part, when you're investing at that point, you're not really gunning for rate of return, but more security and less up and down, right? So I said to him, now that your retirement's taken care of, now what? And he goes, well, my parents are getting kind of old. And I go, dude, your mom's still young and fit and active. I mean, she could live another 25 years. So the idea that, she's going to pass away and you're going to make like a pile of money, right? I mean, and your parents may get sick and they may spend that money. So maybe that's why they're giving it away now. Maybe, they know something you don't know yet. and they want to make sure that you guys have a little something. I don't know. We were spitballing, right?
Throwing out stuff,
But
yeah.
I said, because, one of the questions he asked is, should I buy a house with it? And I was like, okay, well, let's talk about that, because real estate's not a terrible investment. And he said to me, he goes, look, here's what I know about the housing market. He says, the longer I wait, the harder it is to get into, because prices just keep going up. I'm like, yeah, like anything else. I said to him, but you are single, you have no kids. And if you wanted to pick up and move to Jamaica or Iceland or New Zealand, you could just do it. I can't. Right. So do you want to be tied down with a house in Toronto? I said to him, like, do you need a 4-bedroom, $1 million home in Toronto when you could live in St. Thomas? Right. So, and he said to me, no, he goes, I don't really picture myself, living in the city my whole life. I said, okay. So I said, renting may not be a bad idea, but let me ask you this question. I said to him, after you pay your rent and after you buy your groceries and you live your life, how much can you legitimately save in a year? And he goes, this year will be the first year I could put like $5,000 away. And I said, if you buy a house, that money's gone. Because people think, oh, well, my mortgage is cheaper than rent, so I'm good. Yeah, then there's property tax, and there's utilities, and then there's maintenance, right? Stuff's gonna break, and guess who has to fix it? That's you, I said to him, right? And property taxes can go up, stuff's gonna, you're gonna have to change your roof one day, you're gonna have to change your furnace one day, you're gonna have to change, you're gonna have to paint one day. All I'm saying is these are little things right now. If you said to me, I bank 20 grand a year, I'd say buy the house, because you've got enough of a cushion in your disposable income that if something went sideways and you need to change the roof, you've got the money to do it. But you don't. I go, you're on that edge, right? Like, you're basically spending what you make. You're finally being able to put some money away. And maybe we chalk that up to because you're not traveling, because he's a big travel guy, right? So I said, I don't know, the house will stretch you. I said, whereas if you bank that money for retirement and just let it double a few times, you're rocking and rolling. Even if you work till 70, that 100 grand becomes 800. There's 40 plus CPP and OAS deferred to age 70. There's your 65. You've done it, right? And if you can put a little bit of savings along the way, you're good, right? So that was where the conversation came in. It was like, do I buy a house? Do I save it for retirement? I don't know. I'm a big believer when I do planning is to start with the end in mind and shore up the end, right? Because when you're 80, do you want to be working? I mean, people over the age of 65, I think two-thirds of Canadians over the age of 65 that work because they have to.
But it also sounds terrible, but will you live until you're 80?
Well,
Like,
maybe, but what if you live through your 95?
But that's the thing, right? You have to think of any case of this scenario of, you could die when you're 65, but you could also die when you're 100. You don't know what's going to happen.
But here's the thing, that 100 grand that he's going to get, right? It's a gift. Like, he didn't have to save it, right? So if he gets to 65 and dies, touch wood, it doesn't happen, right? Because he's a really good friend of mine. I hate to see that. But if he never gets to enjoy that money, in theory, it was never really his to begin with. It was a gift, right? So, but if he lives to 100 and we keep growing the capital to a certain age and then just living off the interest, his parents have given him the best gift ever, which is the ability to retire without stress. Right. I mean, look, today, like 7 or 8 years ago, the statistics in Canada were that 25% of women and 13% of men were going to live past the age of 95. If you retire at 65, that's a 30-year swing. 30 years retired. Most people are going to work 30 years and retire 30 years. So for every year you work, you need 2 years of income. How are you going to do that? Right? My children, statistically, they believe that 50% of children born today, or in the last, say, 10 years, are going to live beyond 105. 50% is what they think is going to happen based on trends. So could you imagine if my 3 kids finish school when, let's say, they're 25, work for 40 years till they're 65, and then live another 40 years? Okay, 105, you're not going to do a whole lot compared to when you're 65. I get all that.
but
but
you never know what's
you
going to
never
happen.
know.
I mean,
Of course
perfect
not.
example is my dad passed away at 61. My mom was a
And my
nurse, and
mom,
she,
and
yeah,
my mom
so
just before 60. So same
yeah,
boat.
and my mom was a nurse, and she was working in my dad's office. So when he passed away, she retired at 50, 57.
Was
So
forced though.
she was forced to retire, and it was
Yeah.
kind of the, I mean, she was very, my parents were very smart about that. They had their guy who, they were very smart with their money, and they were good, so she's fine. But that is a concern of hers, right? I mean, she's good. I'm hoping she'll live until she's 120. That's my plan for her. But
Okay, great.
you never know how long. And that's what she says, is she, even though she was left a certain amount of money and whatever, she is very smart with her money, because she doesn't know, because technically she may live longer than she actually worked, right? Because of just life circumstances. And it was even the thought of, at that age, oh, well, do I start working in a hospital again? Do I go back? What
Right.
what do I do?
Right. And
So
lucky for you guys, your parents were savers. They stayed below what they were making. And
mhm.
now look, dad's a doctor, mom's a nurse, so the income was probably pretty high, like higher than the average. So listen, when income is high, it's a lot easier to spend less than you
uh,
make.
but it's also a lot easier to think that you have that fluid income. That is
Very
what you
true.
do find, is that, someone, and I'll say an acquaintance. It's interesting because people, they say that the richest people are the people that save the most, and who are, in quotation, the cheapest. Because, and no, that's not necessarily always the case, but I do know someone who was left 100 grand by their dad, and who was not used, maybe makes 35 a year, and is in the lower end of the income spectrum, and blew it all and is out of money. Didn't invest it, didn't do anything smart with the money, and 2 years later doesn't have any money. So it's kind of
Yeah.
the balance between what you choose. Because there are a lot of doctors. There was a doctor in my hometown who ended up married, divorced, married again to someone who spent all her money, because he was like, oh, hit the jackpot, have a wealthy doctor, spend all of her money. And 5 years later they got divorced, and she was literally left with nothing,
Yeah.
because he spent, so that's true. But it doesn't mean, regardless of your income spectrum, that you can't be careful with it. You have to, you could go and spend it very easily because you think you have the fluid cash, but you don't.
Right. And you know what? When you have the luxury of out earning the problem, that's the temptation, right? It's I'm gonna live La Vida Loca because I make all this money, and then you're like, oh crap, where did it all go? Right. And look, I've said it before, I've got clients that make 30, 40 grand a year, and they're not gonna miss a beat in retirement. And I have clients that make over 200 a year, and it's a dog's breakfast, because
Mhm.
they can't control their spending. But I guess the point I was trying to make is that when you do earn a higher income, you've got more of a cushion,
Right, right,
right?
right. Yeah.
And I mean, I think gone are the days, or slowly going are the days where, people judge you on the size of your house, or the car that you drive, or the clothes that you wear, or whatever. I mean, my parents' generation, they were all about image. And image is important, don't get me wrong. But I think slowly we're
I,
you know,
I think, yeah, I think the other thing too is that your image can be adjusted and tweaked, and you can have this fake image of what you actually are via any type of social media or anything. There's this trend going on that says social media versus real life. But
social
that's
media
it.
versus real
It's
life.
vote versus real life, or this is what you see on social media versus what is actually happening. And it's funny because you have some people who are, they post every single thing, and they, I had this amazing breakfast, or I had this, and their life can be a complete shit show in a way. And then you have people who don't really share on social media, who could be living like the most glamorous life. It's very
You
interesting,
know
the
what?
perception.
I don't, thank goodness for social media, because back in my day, we took Polaroids of our breakfast and ran down the street and showed it to people because, you know, they cared so much about what we ate. Polaroid.
I had
Oh, it
someone who
turned out
called.
great.
It's interesting though. I had someone who called me who was just asking a friend of mine who was like, hey, like you did the social media diploma, like you have all this stuff. Like, I just have a few questions for you. And I'm like, yeah, sure. No problem. And that's the biggest thing. They're like, how do I get a following without sharing everything that I do? Like, I'm not that person. A friend of mine actually just started becoming a realtor. And he is asking for social media help. So I'm like, okay, well, this is with the Instagram algorithm and everything like that. Like, this is what you have to do. And he's like, but I don't want to share all that stuff. And I'm like, what? That's kind of just the game of it. I mean, no, there are different ways to approach sharing things. You don't necessarily have to share, you know, your breakfast, or, you know, it's a different kind of demographic, especially with realty, but you do have to share those things because that's what people, it's ridiculous what some people watch. I mean, we were talking about the fact of the kid opening Kinder eggs on YouTube.
My kids watch that all the time when they were much younger. All the time.
And it is the most ridiculous that you literally will sit and watch someone do. I go on YouTube before I go to bed.
We watch reality shows as adults. We'll watch like,
The Bachelor,
you know, Home Improvement, or we'll watch 90 Day Fiance, or you'll watch that, right? Or The Bachelorette, or whatever, right? Yeah. So it's interesting. You know, it's also interesting what goes viral, what doesn't, right? So, you know, for example, my kids are hooked on this one video called Everyone Loves Tacos or something like that. It's just a silly little cartoon about tacos. We'll put a link in it or something if we want for the YouTube video. But and the thing's got like millions of views, and it's just the silliest thing. And the kids, they just giggle. They think it's hilarious, right?
But I don't even know, sometimes even in terms of researching YouTube, I watch these things and I'm like, why did I just watch this? Like, but I'm so fascinated. And then you get sucked in and then you just watch all of the channels. Like, it's such an interesting.
You can. Yeah, totally.
Oh yeah. I can, you know, plan to go to bed at, cause I you know, I may be 31, but I like going to bed at like 9:30. I think sometimes you'll message me, ask me a question or something, and I'm like, I'm in bed already. Like, that's past my bedtime. But then I find sometimes I can go to bed at that time, like already, but then, you know, I'm just going to look at my phone or look at my YouTube, and I can be stuck on there until like 2:00 in the morning, or TikTok. TikTok is the most ridiculous social media. But it's amazing. And I can't stop watching it. I downloaded
There's
it.
Some funny stuff on there. For sure.
There is some funny, and it's just like, why am I watching? And then I notice myself posting videos of my dog. Like, there's the have you seen the burrito one? I no longer wish to adult today. For now, I will be a cozy burrito. And it's like so this person like wrapping in a burrito. Anyways, I did a whole video of just my dog wrapped in a blanket. And I'm like, why did I just do that? And it has like all of these views on it. It's ridiculous.
It kind of is ridiculous. So, but it's funny what people will watch and pay attention to and fund and put money towards, right? Yeah. Every time somebody watches a video, so, you know, an advertiser is paying money to be a part of that, right? Exactly. So it's interesting. And you know what, you know, looping it back to financial planning and your real estate friend, you know, I have a few friends that are real estate agents that have Instagram pages, and their stuff is just flooded with houses that they're listing. Or, you know, just help this couple get into a house. Just look at this beautiful house that we're putting up in a few days, and to create that sort of that buzz. Mm-hmm. But it can be a full-time job. It really can.
I mean, that's literally what I went to school for.
And it's literally why you're my producer. So the producer of everything, right?
Yeah, I like that. I'm gonna get a business card that says that. Producer of everything.
Behind the ball, Samantha Ballard, the producer of everything.
I love it.
Perfect.
I love it.
So, you know, so just circling back to my friend who had that inheritance, you know, I would recommend to anybody out there that does have an inheritance and they're sort of struggling to figure out what they're going to do with it. Look, 90 to 95% of people that come into money, whether it's inheritance or a lottery winning, a year later are in a worse financial position, right? I mean, imagine tomorrow if you inherited $10 million, or if you won the lottery and you won $10 million. right? We always talk about it, right? We always go, oh, what would you do? What would be the first thing you do? And people are like, oh, I pay off the houses of like all my friends. And I'm like, okay, well, there goes your money. It's gone, right? And but what would your plan be, right? And I don't know. I think I mean, I don't play the lottery. To me, it's just another form of tax, right?
Mm.
You have a better chance of being hit by lightning twice than you do of winning the lottery. So, but what is the plan, right? Like, so if you're sitting here today going, okay, well, we've had 12 months of COVID. I've got a glimpse of what retirement looks like, because guess what? If you've lost your job and you're sitting at home and you're living off your savings, that's retirement. That's what you're doing. So
It
unemployment and
was,
retirement are pretty much the same.
I mean, that's what happened to me with lockdown. It was all of a sudden everything stopped. I owned
Yeah,
my arts education company, and schools don't now,
gone.
like, it was such an extra, is that everything was gone. And it was, for me, I was terrified, because I'm actually a planner, I'm a saver. I make sure every month I have a certain amount of money going into my TFSA, my RSPs. Like, I very much show, like, everything. I like to save, and I like to know exactly how much money, and I have all of my insurance and my like life insurance and all of that stuff. So not all of a sudden just not having an income, was terrifying. It was,
Oh,
what am I going to do? I was very, very careful. And the first thing I did was actually I call him my finance dude. I called him and I literally said to him, how long can I live off the money I have? And that was the first thing that I said, because this was before, we didn't hear anything about the government. I didn't think about anything like that. I
right.
do have to pause this for 2 seconds because my dog walker's here. My
I've restarted the recording.
Perfect. Sorry, my dog is a very dramatic dog, so I have to go get him, put him on the leash, drag him. I'm sure you got a little video
Right.
of me dragging him
Like
to
like
the.
like his owner, right? A little dramatic.
I don't know where he gets it from.
Just just for context, I mean, you did perform on Broadway, right, for a few years. So
Did not.
that's,
Yeah. Okay.
there is a performance angle to this. I'm not just insulting you by calling you
Sure.
dramatic. So,
That's true. That's true.
you
I
know,
studied. I studied drama in New York as well. So yeah, that's true.
yeah.
There
So
is
there
a
you go.
background to an acting career that's behind this. Wow, how many careers have I had?
Right.
Too many.
Well, the average person has 7 in their lifetime.
Actually?
7 jobs.
Oh
7 jobs.
gosh.
Yeah. It
Wow.
gone are the days, or very rare are the days. Very rare do you see people that are with the same company for 30 or 40 years and then they retire. So rare these days. People move
I feel
around. People move
people
laterally,
get
move up.
bored.
They get bored. They want something challenging, different, and that's why we started the Behind the Vault. Is I wanted to do something a little more creative and
Mhm.
give back at the same time, right? I mean, I didn't have to do any of this and gone on my merry way, but anyways. So, getting back. So let's talk about something else then. So we've talked about wills a little bit. We've talked about inheritance and prepping for retirement. What do you think are some of the other big worries that are out there?
I mean, I think I do have some questions, but I think some of them would be better suited on their own singular podcast. So we may want to save that but maybe I'm wondering if we should finish up for the day for this one podcast. I
Sure.
think maybe we've given them an earful of a lot of.
There's been some good information. Yeah, absolutely.
There's been
So
some great. So maybe we should just end here and then we can pop another one out maybe within a week or so
next time.
once we
Yeah.
get our next time. I don't even know. Let's not do a timeline.
Next time. Yeah.
Next time. So should you finish off with your infamous saying?
My infamous saying.
Your
Well, I will
infamous
say this
saying.
before we do that. I
Okay.
will say that, if anybody listening does have questions, have, things you want us to talk about on the podcast, you want to jump on with us, maybe, we'd even consider that, have a few guests here and there.
Yeah.
Email us, info@behindthevault.net. And if anybody's looking for some help in their own financial situation, again, info@behindthevault.net, and we'd be more than happy to, just take a look and have a conversation. The first consultation is complimentary. And then, we sort of take it from there. Right. So, this was our first Kick at the Canada podcast. It was kind of fun. And
Yeah, kind of fun.
kind of fun. It was lots of fun.
It was so
And
much
you've been
fun.
and you've been behind the vault.
There it is. All right. Thank you. And we will see you next
All right.
time.